Good morning and welcome to today's T&D World webinar titled Unmanned and Unmatched, Why Drones Do It Better Now and in the Future, sponsored by Cyberhawk. I'm Nikki Chandler, Editorial Director for T&D World with Endeavor Business Media. To begin, let me explain how you can participate in the session. First, if you have any technical difficulties during the session, please submit that to the questions window, and our technical experts are here to help you out. We do recommend disabling any pop-up blocking software or extensions in your browser, as these can cause issues with that player. Additionally, we do welcome your questions during the event today. We're going to answer as many questions as possible during that Q&A session that will follow our main discussion, but please feel free to send in those questions at any time. To do so, simply type your questions into the question window on the side of your screen and hit that submit button. Also, please be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available on the T&D World website within the next 24 hours. You'll be notified by email when that archive is available. Now, I would like to introduce our guest for the discussion today. Chris Fleming is the visionary of Cyberhawk. He's recognized as one of the pioneers of our industry, having led many of Cyberhawk's early world's firsts on projects around the globe. As an inspection engineer, Chris has worked extensively in power generation, oil and gas, mining, and utilities around the world. Prior to co-founding Cyberhawk in 2008, Chris was responsible for the asset integrity of the Chevron Captain platform and floating production storage and offloading vessel in the North Sea, while planning and executing inspection strategies to extend the life of these assets. So welcome, Chris. I'm going to go ahead and jump into our discussion. I've got a few questions today, and we'll discuss some topics before we get to our Q&A. But as the co-founder and CEO of Cyberhawk, what were our industry's challenges that led you to start Cyberhawk?
Thanks, Nikki, and it's great to be on here. So the introduction kind of explained why and how we got started. I was responsible for two assets in the North Sea, and the North Sea is a pretty wild place to work. And when the performance of drone batteries started to improve beyond a couple of minutes, we had this idea and we wondered if we could complete some under-deck inspections of critical valves on offshore platforms. So these jobs would typically be carried out by rope access personnel, so people who donned harnesses and would then rappel or abseil off the side of the platform, get into a really awkward location to do an inspection. And that planning might have taken a week to do. And then the job itself would have taken sometimes multiple days before you could complete the inspection. So the idea was, hey, I wonder if we can use a drone rather than putting humans in these dangerous environments. And that's how we got started. It wasn't easy at first, but now it's going pretty well.
Well, that's a really cool answer because, safety is, that's the most important thing. So, that's a really interesting way to get this started and a solution to a problem. And I'm kind of learning a little bit more about that part of the industry, the oil and gas and the offshore. We've just joined our team with some oil and gas people at our company. So that's exciting. So I know Cyberhawk is a global brand, just like T&D World. And so with operations in over 40 countries and hundreds of thousands of inspections completed, have you learned any key lessons? Cyberhawk, have you guys learned from this diverse international experience?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we've worked in some, I think it's more than 40 countries. And the reason that we started doing it was because our drone business was so seasonal. And we could fly in the British summers, but the winters were really hellish, tremendously high winds and lashing rain. So to keep the business going, we said we'd better find work overseas in those winter months. And that's what drove us initially to working in the Middle East. And so my lesson from that really, I don't know if it relates to the energy world, but as a small business, sometimes you just got to get on a plane and go and meet customers, even without knowing if it's going to work for you. So It was successful for us. You know, I got actually the first job that we did overseas was in Oman, in the Middle East, on an LNG facility there. And that early work that we did over those winters really kept the company going for years to come. So that was one learning. The other learning that we had was that we were quite often the very first company to use a drone in that country. So a lot of the CAAs and FAAs of this world took their lead from the British CAA, and so we were able to share what we'd done in order to get flight permissions in the United Kingdom and say, hey, this has been done successfully and safely in other countries. These are the rules that we followed. And then we were able to provide those to the CAAs of other countries and say, this is how it was done there safely. And you might want to consider these rules and applying these going forward. So that's what happened. And we've gone to work on in different places as diverse as, Papua New Guinea and Ghana and other places where drones had never been flown before. So those were my kind of key takeaways early on in the business.
Yeah, and I think we'll get a little bit into that in a few minutes as far as those waivers and things like that. But so you did mention the U.S. utility. Well, and, T&D World, we like case studies. Maybe can you share more about those specific cases, like that UK refinery and then an FPSO in Ghana that illustrate those specific significant savings and operational benefits of drone inspections?
Sure. So, I mean, everybody recognizes that drones are safer and often a faster way of doing the inspection. But I think what people are going to start to realize in the future is the massive savings that are involved. And I'm talking about savings in the, right now at this stage or in the next year or two, for our customers saving hundreds of millions of dollars. It really is that large. But even in the early days, we were saving our customers money. And the examples that you referred to there in the early days, and I'm talking about maybe 2010 of the refinery example, one of our clients was going to shut down a refinery because they had a flame coming out of the molecular seal, which is a vessel just underneath the flare tip. And a flare is designed as its primary purpose is as a safety device. I mean, if something goes wrong in a refinery, all of the gas inventory gets released up the flare and it gets burnt off very quickly so that you don't have an explosion. So that's a critical piece of the refinery. It can't fail and it can't not operate 100% effectively. So they were going to shut that refinery down. And they called us and they said, if you can get here within the next 2 hours, we won't shut the refinery down if you can tell us what's going on. So we flew the drone. We were able to see this hole, this perforation in the molecular seal. It was about that size. We took a photograph of it. They then increased the gas on the plant and they basically purged and they blew that flame out. And then we monitored it every day for a month. And then we continued to monitor on a weekly basis. And they didn't have to shut down the refinery. They kept it going for another year and kept their originally planned turnaround, and they saved over $100 million by not having to shut that refinery down. So we've been saving money from the very beginning. What we used to say to our customers was, hey, rather than you pay us a day rate, why don't you give us a share of those savings that you're making? Unfortunately, they said no. They said, no, we'd rather just pay you a day rate. That continues to stay with utility companies now that are really starting to see the huge savings that you get by inspecting something with a much more thorough method and then finding defects that you can either fix or that were maybe incorrectly assessed in the beginning because people don't have the same vantage when they're inspecting from the ground or from a helicopter. And so reprioritizing their inspection, maintenance and repair campaigns leads them to save hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's why I think it's so exciting. It's not just the terms of savings of time and the safety benefits. It really is the bottom line profitability that's going to be improved as well.
So I've heard that you guys helped a U.S. utility specifically help prevent some outages. Can you give me a little bit more information on that? And maybe what insights you could share about how drone tech contributes to that maintenance and reliability and specifically proactively?
Sure. So I think you're referring to a client that we worked for who'd actually trialed and used drones in the past, but they'd continued to have these outages as a result of failure with some of their critical assets. And what we found was that the type of inspection that the previous incumbent had done, they weren't getting the right imagery to determine the type of, or even find the defect. So missing critical images that needed to be captured. So we reflew those assets with a better collection plan, and we found 12 repairs that had to be carried out within the next 24 hours. So these were kind of critical, what some people might call A tags. So they had to roll trucks the next day to get those fixed, and they haven't had outages on those assets since we did those inspections. So that early learning of doing the job correctly, but getting the information back to the customer overnight to allow them to effect repairs immediately. So that's the first example of one of the utilities that we prevented outages for. Now what we're finding with customers is that their historical inspections, if they're doing them at all, haven't really provided the granularity in inspection results that have allowed them to make the right decisions about whether to repair, replace their assets. So in some cases, they've been overly conservative, and people have earmarked things for repair or replacement that didn't need to be repaired. And so those assets have been reassessed, and then their lifespan has been pushed out. Maybe some other repairs have been carried out in the interim to prolong the life of those assets, but they're no longer having to replace poles or towers, and they're saving millions of dollars as a result in OPEX spend. And that's what I was referring to.
Okay, yeah, that's really important right now too, with how, I mean, so much is going on with the grid and kind of trying to maintain these assets, and so you want to put that time and effort and money where it really needs to be placed. So for utilities that currently don't have a drone inspection program, I know you mentioned maybe some hadn't even been doing any inspection. What advice would you offer to help them get started?
So my advice with anybody who hasn't tried drones yet, or even maybe who hasn't had success with it, is to say, okay, where do you currently have issues on your assets? Which lines do you have that are suffering from periodic outage events? Get a drone company or get us to look at those assets. And my experience is that we've always found things wrong that required almost near immediate repair. And then that brings confidence to the program. If you find some things that are wrong almost immediately, it gives encouragement and confidence to the people, not just the people that have brought us in to do it, but certainly the people that sit above them, the senior execs. But for me, it's trialing the technology, because it moves on. So it moves on fast. So even if you've done something a year ago, I would say the technology has advanced so much that we're able to do so many more assets in less time with better quality imagery. And we're able to get that information, those results back to the customers very, very fast. So if you've dismissed it in the past, because we've had examples of customers saying, yeah, we've tried that and we never got the data, or it took them a month to get the report back to us, I would say think again, because the technology has moved on so much faster now, and yeah, it's really changed.
So, and you had an announcement just the other day about AVIATE. Could you discuss that briefly? Give us a little bit more information on that.
Yeah, it's really it's a way for companies who haven't used drones before to have an easy entry level into an inspection program. So whether companies if they want to do it themselves, because some utility companies have decided, no, we've got our own drone pilots, but we don't quite know how to train, assess them, or what shot sheets, what images to capture. So we can help them get started, or we can help build a program, or we can provide a solution that allows them to analyze their asset information in the software platform. So we can take parts of that puzzle or the entire end-to-end solution and help them get started and really prove the value of the technology. That's what AVIATE does.
Okay, cool. So that's neat how that can be customized to the customer. So let's get in a little bit to the regulation, the regulatory hurdles. Cyberhawk was recently granted a beyond visual line of sight waiver from the FAA. So what other, or are there any other regulatory hurdles that you see that might impact the efficiency, the expansion of drone inspections in the utility industry? And if so, how is Cyberhawk addressing those challenges?
So you're right. The biggest hurdle or barrier to this technology is the inability to fly further than you can see. So the drones can do it. They can fly miles away, but legally, unless you have one of these waivers, you have to keep the drone in visual line of sight at all times. So this waiver really allows the technology to be pushed further. So the FAA on a case-by-case basis will review your documentation and your measures that you've put in place and say, okay, in this circumstance, on these assets, using this equipment with the methodology that you've described, we're going to give you a waiver. So that's what the waiver allows. And it really is important because that allows for us to be able to do many more assets in a single flight. It means that we don't have to necessarily go on people's properties, which annoys a lot of people. And I can see not in the too distant future where we'll, with the technology already on board, so, and I'll answer that in a minute, we'll be able to fly from Sacramento to San Francisco on a single flight and inspect an entire transmission line between those two cities, and that's as the crow flies, about 90 miles. So it's really important that we're always on the front foot. And so some of the things that we're doing to enable that is, yes, getting the beyond visual line of sight waivers. We're also introducing automation, which makes it easier for the pilot. So you don't necessarily need to manually fly the asset. It is very intensive in terms of the attention that's required to fly around an asset. So introducing some automation that means that the pilot is watching the drone as it does the automated flight around the asset will really help. And we recently started using hydrogen fuel drones, so powered by hydrogen, that allow us to fly for more than 2 hours. So that BVLOS automation and the hydrogen fuel cell drone will really leverage this technology to allow us to push it further. And the last piece of the puzzle is, what do you do with all this data when once it's gathered? Because we used to do hundreds of assets, now we're doing hundreds of thousands of assets. But when you're doing millions of assets, it's not really feasible that humans are going to be interrogating all that information. So we want to leverage AI where we can to help us find those defects on the assets.
That sounds really cool. I mean, the hydrogen power and then that autonomy, that's really neat. So, you did mention that these drones are becoming increasingly autonomous. So what advancements do you see in drone autonomy over the next 5 years? How can this change that inspection process?
I think we'll just start to do more with less, really. So rather than necessarily having to deploy hundreds of people in the field, you'll have 20 or 30 people in the field who'll be deploying drones and then collecting them, and that imagery, all the data that's gathered, will be reviewed remotely with AI and allow us to gather more data, but to do it at a lower price point. That will mean that utility companies, rather than saying let's do something every year or every 5 years, well, if our assets are going to perform better if we collect the data more regularly, why don't we do this on an annual basis? Why don't we start to preempt things and inspect them more frequently, so that we can not only prevent outages, but we can prevent wildfires, we can prevent all sorts of issues that have catastrophic events. So that's where I see this technology leading to in the next 5 years.
Really helping to solve some major problems for the utility industry. You did mention AI being a help, or that being able to work with this. How do you envision AI playing a role in real-time assessments during drone flights even, and what benefits could this bring to utility companies?
So, we've been working with AI for probably the last 6 years. The challenge that we've had in our industry is if you're trying to teach an algorithm to recognize a defect, is that we didn't have that many defects in order to train the algorithms. Initially we're told, well, if you want an example that was given to me, and when I was sitting with a particular company was, well, if you want to recognize that still, if you wanted AI to recognize a still, I need 1 million images of that still for AI to recognize it. Well, those numbers are changing and they're reducing. So as we gather more data, it will allow the AI to be more confident in its predictions. Right now, if we said to a utility company, hey, we'll find 80% of your defects, but we're going to miss 20. I don't think anybody who would be happy with that would say, no, we need to find 100% of the defects. We can't miss stuff. So we don't lead with AI as being the answer to all of our questions, but it is something that we want to leverage in the future because it's going to be a bottleneck in the near term when we're gathering so much information. It already is with some of our customers in terms of we don't have enough inspectors to process all of this data that's being gathered. So we need to fix that bottleneck, and that allows the technology to proliferate.
So how do you see, kind of maybe more generally, utilities incorporating automation and their future plans for AI?
I think that there are a number of utility companies and other third-party providers who are creating algorithms. So I think what's going to happen is rather than one company coming up with all the answers, there'll be a library of algorithms that people can use. They can plug into their programs and get the benefits from other people's algorithms. So EPRI, for example, has already created one. We've leveraged that, but it's about having that ecosystem where people are prepared to share algorithms and allow everybody to benefit from the work that those companies are doing. So I think that's what's going to happen. Not one company will have the answer. Everybody will start sharing information, and then we'll leverage those algorithms to the best of their ability.
Cool. That's definitely, that sharing is so crucial to utilities. How does Cyberhawk communicate the value of drone inspections to potential utility customers, especially in terms of those cost savings, safety, the environment, and operational efficiency?
I really think we're at a kind of a tipping point in terms of the information that's available around the savings that are going to be made. We haven't really talked about it, to be honest, in terms of the savings, because we think it should be the customer's story to tell, not necessarily ours. I think they recognize the safety benefits and the efficiencies. They also recognize that helicopters are perhaps not the ideal solution. They burn so much fuel, they're very noisy, and although they're operated often by extremely safe companies, statistically, helicopters are not the safest machines. So instinctively, I think utility companies want to move to drones. They just need the proof points, and so it's been relatively slow, or been done not at scale. But I think particularly what we're seeing in California, and it really is it's a movement from west to east in the US, where now all of the utility companies in California, they're looking to do all of their assets more regularly with drones, and they're doing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of inspections every year. And might I say, finding hundreds and hundreds of defects that either prevent outages or prevent wildfires. So they are seeing the benefit, and they've learned the hard way that if things go wrong, then they don't end well for their companies. So they're really taking the bull by the horns in terms of putting these programs into action at scale. But I see it as happening kind of west to east.
So, and we're kind of getting to this last question here before we take a few questions. and finish up. But finally, what is your overall vision for the future of drone inspection programs in the utility industry? And how does Cyberhawk plan to lead in this evolving landscape?
So I'm an inspection engineer at heart. That's what I used to do. I always have inspected things, and we're still an inspection company at heart. That's what we do. But for us, we set out on a journey to not just to save people's lives, not to do things more efficiently, but to find things that have the potential to cause a lot of harm. So we see that opportunity existing at scale. We intend to push on that, to get more drones out in the field, to find more defects, and to keep people safe, and deliver on the BVLOS automation and AI that we discussed. And I think eventually what will happen, our vision is that rather than things going wrong and people finding out about it when a satellite image sees a fire starting in a remote part of California, that we'll get an automated email from a drone that's operating with AI on the edge, able to find those defects in real time and notify people before they cause a problem. And then we're preempting things from happening, forming maintenance strategies that are predictive rather than responsive. So that's where this technology really will prove the greatest benefit.
All right, thank you so much. We already have a few questions in here, and I want to jump right into those since we have just a few minutes left. If anyone else has any more questions, just go ahead and put those in, and we'll get to them as we can. So here's a really fun, interesting question. What's a day like as a drone pilot for Cyberhawk?
Okay, depends. Different things for different verticals, because we do wind turbines, oil and gas inspection for utilities. But for a utility inspector, and I did that job in 2020. It was a lot of fun. You're driving around in a Jeep. So you the night before, you've got all your batteries charged. You've got everything ready to go. You do your kind of weather checks in the morning, maybe before you leave the house. You do a lot of fire index checks. You then call into helicopter dispatch, and you say, I'm going to be flying in this area. They make sure there's no conflict with manned aviation, because believe it or not, you have a lot of helicopters operating near transmission towers. Drive to the location. It's usually, my experience, it's in a beautiful location, far from people's homes, and stand at the base of one of the assets and do the inspection. So your head you're looking up a lot of the time. And then with the BVLOS waiver, some of our pilots are able to fly 1 mile in either direction. So they can do, numerous assets in one flight. And they're doing the same flights every time, because that's what we want. We want the same imagery. You're keeping a lookout for wildlife. You're keeping a lookout for other people on the property, because some people don't like you being nearby their homes. That's always a challenge. And then you work through the day. You take your breaks, and then before sunset, you make sure you've got all of your imagery stored correctly, and then you upload it to the cloud, to the server, as soon as possible, so that people can get at that imagery as fast as possible. So that's kind of a day in the life in the utility inspector.
So we've got, I'm going to do one more question. I'm doing one more question before we have to stop. But this is one that's really important for our audience, for T&D World. And it's pretty simple. How do drone inspections stop power outages? And I know you covered it a little bit, but if you could just give a kind of quick, simple answer for our audience.
It's really easy. We find so many things that are wrong, that are things that are hanging off, things that have hooks that are missing, conductors that are hanging low close to vegetation. These are all the types of defects that we've found. So it doesn't take Einstein to work out how that would prevent an outage. We've got hundreds and maybe thousands of examples now of things that make you go, oh dear, this is a real problem. So yeah, those are some of the examples, Nikki, but we find lots of them.
Okay. And we do have just one more question that I want to get in here before we close. How do you manage all the volume of data and file sizes? And how long is that recorded and stored so that you can come back to that possibly in years to come?
Yeah. So that is where a lot of drone programs have failed. It's getting that vast, volume of data. So the first thing you're going to do is you've got to sort it and compartmentalize it based upon the asset or the SAP ID of the structure. And you want to be doing that at the time of flight. So the photographs are renamed with the asset structure, so you don't have to do that again later. And then you want to get it back to the field as quickly, back from the field as quickly as possible. And then we use AI to basically check the imagery against the lat longs, make sure it's all taken in the right locations of where we thought it was. We then use AI or software to make sure that all of the images are sharp and crisp, because if they're blurry, then they won't be accessible. And then we get it into our iHawk portal within 24 hours so that the inspection engineers can then do the inspection and assessment. We have AI that operates in there that provides some hints, say, we think we found this, but we want you to verify it. So there are some prompts within the software solution to make it easier for the inspectors. But it really is that speed to decision. It's about getting that information and being able to do something as a result of it quickly. That's really important.
Okay. That does conclude today's presentation. I really want to thank you, Chris, for joining us today. On behalf of T&D World, I want to thank Cyberhawk for sponsoring the web chat today. And of course, all of you for joining. Any other questions that we didn't get to, we'll be getting to you via email. So thank you so much. Everybody have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Nikki.